Mahito's mind, once a blank slate of collective negative emotions, begins to form into a disturbingly logical and coherent structure within its own universe of values. He does not act out of irrational impulse or a blind fit of rage. Each of his actions is a calculated step in his own research into the essence of human existence. For him, life is a vast game where the rules can be rewritten at any moment, and humans are the pieces on this board, stripped of their own agency and any inherent value beyond what he assigns them. Facts such as ability to reconstruct his own body after being injured, scoffing at the notion of fragility, or his statements revealing a profound and absolute disdain for life and individuality, show how distorted his new way of thinking has become. He sees himself not merely as a passive observer, but as an artisan of the soul, a sculptor of misery. And for him, there is nothing more beautiful than the complete transformation of a being into something unrecognizable, a true work of art of deconstruction. To get inside Mahito's head, we need to understand that he operates under an extreme form of existential nihilism. He does not believe in intrinsic values, greater purposes, or inherent meanings for life. For him, existence is fundamentally empty, a blank canvas, and the only way to give it meaning, or to himself, is through exploration, manipulation, and, ultimately, the destruction of established paradigms. His attitudes, such as toying with his victims before altering them, do not reveal simple sadism or a desire to inflict pain for its own sake, but a quest for a reaction, proof that the soul can be bent, broken, and molded at his will. He tests the limits of human resilience, not to understand and strengthen it, but to prove that it is an illusion and can be easily dismantled, revealing the fragility of what we consider our essence. We can use scientific analogies to understand his cold and calculating logic. Imagine a scientist who studies the elasticity of a material, applying ever-increasing forces and observing its behavior up to the breaking point. He does not care about the material's pain, but about how it behaves under pressure, what its elastic limit is, and its breaking point. Mahito does the exact same thing with the human soul. He does not see the tears of despair, the screams of agony, or the terror in his victim's eyes. He sees the reaction of a complex structure under his influence. His experiments, however horrific they may be to the human moral sense, are for him a form of data collection on the true nature of the soul, or, as he sees it, the non-existence of an unbreakable essence. He is not driven by visceral hatred, but by a cold, methodical, and relentless curiosity about the mechanisms of existence and how they can be subverted to prove his thesis of nullity. But the true monster was still dormant. Mahito's ability to rationalize his actions so impeccably, seeing himself not as an agent of evil, but as an agent of truth about life, one who unveiled the secrets humanity preferred to ignore in its illusory search for meaning. Mahito's act of total transgression occurs when he transcends simple manipulation and fully embraces the philosophy that human life is inherently insignificant, devoid of any intrinsic value, and that suffering is merely a tool, a means to his own enlightenment and to the revelation of his universal truth. For him, there is no point of return, as he never deviated from his own path. He merely deepened and solidified it into an unshakable conviction. His worldview completely shifts from that of a curious being to a philosopher of desolation, who actively seeks to prove the fragility, nullity, and futility of human existence. He is no longer just testing limits. He is asserting his own terrible truth through the systematic destruction of what humanity values most: individuality, dignity, and the very essence of the soul. In exploring his morality and ethics, we realize that they are not only absent but actively subverted in our common understanding of right and wrong. Mahito has no moral code to guide him. He operates in a vacuum where only his own will, his experiments, and the confirmation of his philosophy hold intrinsic value. He rationalizes his most terrible actions as a way to free humans from their own illusion of meaning, purpose, and individuality. He sees them trapped in an empty existence, doomed to a life of suffering and illusions, and by manipulating their souls, he believes he's revealing to them the uncomfortable truth of their own malleability and insignificance. This is a perverse and twisted form of salvation in his mind, where the only true freedom is the absence of form, purpose, and any pretense of intrinsic value. He's the surgeon who operates without anesthesia, claiming that pain is the only way to awaken to reality. This brings the viewer into a deeply uncomfortable existential dilemma. What if he's right? This question is disturbing because, although his actions are undeniably terrible and repugnant, Mahito's philosophy raises unsettling questions about the nature of existence, the purpose of life, and the inherent value of human life. In a world where suffering is ubiquitous, where the search for meaning is constant and often fruitless, and where promises of a greater purpose seem to crumble in the face of adversity, Mahito's words, however distorted, can resonate with the despair and nihilism present in some hearts. He attacks the very foundation of our belief in a greater purpose, in an untouchable soul, forcing us to confront the possibility that everything we consider important is merely a fragile and illusory construct, a veil that conceals an existential void. Delving deeper into the psychological analysis, Mahito's behavior makes sense within his own cold and distorted logic, a belief system he constructed for himself that isolates him from human morality. He is the personification of extreme solipsism, where only his own consciousness and perception hold reality and value. For Mahito, others are not independent beings with their own internal experiences, with dreams, fears, and pains. They are merely extensions or projections of his own reality, mere avatars subject to his will and worldview. This radical and dehumanizing perspective allows him to act without any sense of guilt, remorse, or compassion, for to him, there is no real other to whom he can cause harm in the sense we understand. The victims are merely materials for study, objects without individuality, without history, without real suffering to him. To validate his behavior in psychological terms, we can draw on studies addressing lack of empathy and dehumanization, concepts well established in social and clinical psychology. Individuals or groups who demonstrate a complete absence of empathy are capable of committing atrocious acts without feeling the moral or emotional weight of their actions. Mahito is the perfect example of this. He cannot, by his very nature, put himself in his victim's shoes, because for him, they have no intrinsic place, no individuality that deserves consideration or respect. He sees them as tools for his experiments and for the validation of his nihilistic philosophy, rather than as sentient beings with inherent dignity. He is the antithesis of human connection, the embodiment of radical isolation. His ability to cold-heartedly experiment on others without a flicker of feeling is a chilling mirror of extreme psychological detachment. We can draw comparisons to real-world cases of individuals who have demonstrated a remarkable capacity to rationalize questionable acts, seeing themselves as agents of a greater truth or a higher purpose, even if that purpose is destruction or domination. In some cases, personalities with antisocial personality disorders or narcissistic traits may exhibit characteristics that, though not identical, echo the coldness, lack of remorse, and ability to objectify others that Mahito embodies. He is not a psychopath in the clinical sense, as he is not human, but his behaviors and logic reflect an amplified cosmic form of these psychological tendencies. He is the horror of complete disconnection, of absolute detachment from the human condition, operating with a chilling clarity that makes him all the more terrifying. His ability to emotionally separate himself from his actions is the key to his destructive efficiency. What remains after Mahito's destruction and influence is a trail of profound psychological trauma and a disturbing understanding of the fragility of human existence. He does not seek an empire or power in the traditional sense of physical domination or territorial control. His true legacy is the destabilization of humanity's very perception of itself and the value of life. The surrounding world is shaped not only by the physical victims of his grotesque manipulations, but by the seed of doubt he plants in the minds of those who witness his acts. Doubt about what truly defines us, about the nature of the soul, and about the true resilience of humanity. His actions force other characters to confront the idea that the soul, that highly cherished essence, seen as untouchable, is not as indestructible, sacred, or immutable as once thought, and that it can be corrupted and distorted with alarming ease. The consequences of his actions, both real within the story's universe and fictional in their lasting impact, are the erosion of trust among human beings and the emergence of a primal, existential fear, the fear of having one's identity stolen, disfigured, or worse, proven as insignificant and worthless. He not only causes immeasurable physical harm and unimaginable suffering, but inflicts deep and lasting psychological wounds, leaving scars that extend far beyond the body, reaching into the collective and individual psyche itself. Mahito's presence reveals humanity's deepest vulnerability, the potential to lose its very essence. The most profound philosophical reflection he leaves us with, which echoes darkly and persistently, is, who are we to judge? If Mahito is a direct product of human hatred, fear, indifference, and cruelty, that is, of our own emotions and actions, then, to some extent, he is our creation, an amplified reflection of humanity's worst facets. We are, in a way, responsible for his existence, and this leads us to question our own actions, our interactions with each other, and what we allow to flourish in our hearts and in our society. He is a mirror, albeit a distorted and terrifying one, of our own potential for dehumanization, for apathy, and for self-destruction. Mahito is the personification of the question, what happens when humanity turns against itself, and what is the cost of this disconnection? But perhaps he wasn't the last. Fear and hatred, the seeds of his existence, continue to reside within humanity, and with them, the possibility of new manifestations, new echoes of the abyss that lies within us, waiting for the opportunity to take form again, a vicious cycle of creation and destruction. Mahito forces us to confront the uncomfortable truth that evil, at times, is not an external, alien force, but a dark manifestation of our own emotions and internal conflicts. He is not just a villain. He is a mirror, a walking dilemma that asks us, if the worst of us can materialize in such a terrifying way, what does that say about who we truly are and the responsibility we bear for our own shadows? His existence is a grim reminder that sometimes the most terrifying monsters are those we create from within ourselves. Get ready to dive into an abyss of the human psyche. Have you ever imagined that the worst of us could take form? What if the fear and hatred we harbor for each other could materialize into something or someone? Be prepared to question the very nature of existence, because what you're about to discover will unravel the most disturbing layers of our own creation. In a universe where cursed energy flows from the deepest human sentiments, Mahito emerges, an entity embodying the darkest side of our collective. Imagine a world where every thought of aversion, every act of cruelty, and every pang of distrust coalesce to form a conscious being. Mahito isn't just a creature. He's the product and mirror of humanity's most unfavorable aspects. He was born from the negative emotions humans harbor for each other, such as fear, hatred, repulsion, and even indifference. It's a scenario where the very essence of society, with its complex interactions and conflicts, becomes the breeding ground for the manifestation of an innate evil. Mahito is the personification of social malaise, a grim echo of every time humanity fails in its capacity to coexist. The environment in which Mahito developed is not physical, but rather existential and psychosocial. He didn't originate from a geographical place, like a haunted forest or a hidden lair, but from an idea, from a collective state of mind that perpetuates and amplifies daily. The basis of his existence is rooted in social psychology, especially in how tensions, prejudices, injustices, and disregard for others can accumulate and manifest in unexpected and dangerous ways. The lack of empathy, the objectification of the other, the pursuit of power at any cost, and indifference to the suffering of others, even if unconscious, created the perfect conditions for his formation and growth. The neglect and cruelty that one human being can inflict upon another without flinching are the oxygen that fuels the flame of Mahito's existence. He is the sum total of every instance where an individual fails to recognize the humanity in their fellow being, the personification of selfishness and disconnection. When observing Mahito, we see a vivid representation of what psychology would call the collective shadow, the unrecognized, repressed, and often denied aspects of human nature, those impulses and thoughts we prefer to sweep under the rug of consciousness. He is the explicit manifestation of our capacity to dehumanize, to see others not as beings with feelings, complexities, dreams, and an existence as valid as our own, but as mere objects for our own ends, be it convenience, amusement, dominance, or personal validation. He is a distorted and amplified reflection of how society, at times, manages to strip others of their essence, rendering them disposable and irrelevant. He represents the coldness that can arise when human connection is severed. And this introduces the first central psychological trait involved, the personalization. Mahito, from his genesis, does not see humans as individuals with stories, hopes, and pains, but as shapeless masses, as raw material to be molded. He doesn't perceive them as beings with an inherent existence, with intrinsic value, but rather as malleable elements of a vast laboratory, a perverse reflection of how society sometimes manages to empty others of their identity, turning them into mere tools or obstacles. For him, every person is a potential experiment. The trigger for Mahito's transformation was not a singular event, an isolated trauma, but a continuous and interconnected series of interactions with humans and a meticulous observation of their rawest emotions. In the beginning, he was a curiosity, a being who explored the world with a disturbing indifference, almost childish in his lack of empathy, yet with latent intelligence and an alarming capacity for learning. However, the moment of true rupture, the point where he begins to transform into something truly terrifying and with a macabre purpose, is when he discovers absolute control over human souls, the ability of soul manipulation. This ability is not merely physical power over flesh and bone. It is the key to his understanding of what makes us human and, consequently, what he can dismantle, reshape, and even subvert to his own twisted image. As Mahito comprehends the limitless potential of his ability, he begins to transform from a curious entity into a being with a dark and distorted purpose, to redefine existence itself and to prove the futility of individuality. His internal conflict, if we can call it that, is not one of doubt or remorse, nor an existential crisis seeking moral purpose, but an incessant quest for meaning in his own existence through the exploration and subversion of others' suffering. He does not seek pleasure in pain itself, like a common sadist, but in the manipulation, redefinition, and disfigurement of what it means to exist for humans. The external conflict manifests in his acts of bodily modification, transforming people into grotesque and unrecognizable forms, not out of pure malice or a blind destructive impulse, but out of an insatiable desire for experimentation and to prove that the soul is as pliable and malleable as the physical body, if not more so. For him, every life is a new enigma to be unraveled through pain. Psychology would explain this transformation through the concepts of positive reinforcement and operant conditioning. Each time Mahito manipulated a soul and saw the result, be it the indescribable anguish of the victim, the despair of their loved ones, or the awe of observers who grasped the depth of his horror, he received a form of reward that propelled him to continue his explorations. This constant feedback, combined with his innate lack of empathy and his insatiable curiosity, led him down a path of escalating actions, each more daring, cruel, and sophisticated. It's as if, in his perverse mind, he were conducting a vast and complex study on the malleability of existence, without any regard for the ethical, moral implications, or the unimaginable suffering he caused. He operates in an absolute moral vacuum, where the only value is the discovery of new limits for his manipulation and the confirmation of his own theory about human insignificance.